This is the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast. I'm Ty Higgins. The obstacles for young and beginning farmers to start a farm business are well known, but some careful thought out planning and strategies can help alleviate some of those challenges. To talk more about that on the Ohio Farm Bureau podcast from Wright and Moore, Ashley Donnelly and Jonathan Cottingham. And we're going to talk about some pretty heavy topics, setting goals, business structures, estate planning, liability. You guys are taking the fun out of all this, but very important, especially when it comes to setting goals and putting things on paper to get things started and move in the right direction down the road.
Yeah, Ty. So one of the most important things for a young farmer getting started is that you really need to have that 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the 15-year plan, if you can get that far. One thing we've seen young farmers struggle with is if you don't have a plan in place and you're growing willy-nilly, so to speak, you might be extending yourself too far on the credit front, or you might be working yourself a little bit too hard to take the fun out of farming from that perspective. One thing I like to tell farmers, we have a tendency to want to buy the next piece of land, buy the next tractor. But if you haven't thought about what that's going to look like for the next 5, 10, 15 years, sometimes you buy that piece of property and then a better one comes for sale just a year later, and you're no longer positioned to take advantage of those opportunities. So I like to advise young farmers, especially people right around my age, that when we're making these decisions, you need to consider your long-term goals, how your current situation factors in there, and what this action is going to do as far as the future of your farm and the legacy you're trying to leave.
And I would say including too, like your family members or your business partners for sure. Like I think that we kind of get used to our day-to-day routines and everything, and then we don't stop to talk to our brother or our sister who is really our business partner too. And these decisions they affect everyone in the family too, which is just another added layer of stress, but it can also be very helpful because you know your business partner so well because they're family.
You mentioned in those goals that the line of credit and what it takes to really get started. And you ask any small business owner that got started, they're going to need a business structure. What does that look like for a young and beginning farmer?
There are a lot of options out there. You can always just farm Schedule F, so just yourself as a sole proprietorship. That's generally not something we advise. Sometimes from a liability perspective, sometimes if you have partners, it's really important to have that business structure in there to help resolve disputes and things like that. I normally tell people that there are two things they really need to consider when looking at a business entity for their farming operation, and that's the legal structure and the tax structure. So from the legal structure perspective, we really have three options. You can choose an S Corp, a C Corp, or an LLC. There are pros and cons to each of those options. It's definitely not a one choice fits all. And then from the tax side, your S Corp and your C Corp both have different tax rules than your LLC is going to have. Your C Corporation is what everyone thinks of as the traditional double taxation model. So the C Corp would have to pay taxes, and then the shareholders would also have to pay taxes. The S Corp can avoid that a little bit, but we run into some long-term capital gains issues if there needs to be the sale of property or equipment. And then the LLC, kind of the darling of the business planning world right now, it can choose any tax treatment it wants, whether it wants to be taxed like a corporation or like a partnership, which would not pay taxes directly, and then only the underlying partners pay taxes. So those are the really big things to consider. On the legal structure side, there are different liability protections. So an S Corp or a C Corp is going to provide the most liability protection for you. So that's something to weigh depending on what sort of a farm business you're running. Sometimes the liability protection is worth paying the extra taxes.
Why should a younger beginning farmer think about estate planning? That might be the last thing on their mind. Why should it be the first?
I think it kind of goes back to those goals when you're starting a business or even really as you go through life, like what am I trying to accomplish here? It's really not just about taking care of yourself and your business, but your family. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and trying to keep the farm together as a whole unit and passing it from generation to generation can be really difficult, especially nowadays. It's land's not cheap, equipment's not cheap. So how do we take in all of these factors and unknowns and kind of plan ahead to accomplish our goals and to make sure that those goals can be accomplished in the future with our family? And it's hard too, because farming adds a layer of complexity that a lot of other business types don't, because there's so many different family units that can be involved.
Complexity is a great word for agriculture. It also comes into play with the word liability. Mostly we talk about landowner liability, but what kind of liability are we talking about when it comes to starting a farm operation?
Yeah, so every day, farmers face liability, whether they know it or not. Every time you take a tractor down the road, every time you haul a load of grain, all those activities present the opportunity for tortious action that could lead to liability on the farm. All of a sudden, you're feeding hay and somebody runs into your tractor. Even if it's not your fault, there's a good chance they're going to try and sue you anyways. And that's where liability comes in. One little accident like that, especially for a beginning farmer, can be enough to sink the ship, so to speak. And that's why business structure choice is so important, to make sure even if the business goes down, we don't want you losing your personal home. We don't want your family going hungry because of something like that. And then it's also incredibly important to get liability insurance. 10 or 15 years ago, the saying probably was $1 million of coverage was enough. But anymore, the way things have moved, I would say 3 million is the new million on the liability insurance front.
Yeah, we really recommend all of our, I guess, each of our business entities or families that we're working with to have at least 3 to 5 million. Because that's your first line of protection. Anytime if you were to have a lawsuit filed against you, that liability insurance is that first line. And then that LLC just kind of adds a backup layer. And the LLCs, it's kind of, one of our rules. We don't like to mix high risk assets with low risk assets. So to us, high risk assets are your machinery and your equipment that you're driving down the road, and your low risk asset is your land, because it's not moving.
You guys talked about all these important topics last weekend at the Young Ag Professionals Winter Leadership Experience. And one of the questions that I'm sure you get asked quite often when you make that presentation: so I've started my farm. How do I grow or advance my farm? They're not making any more farmland, and farmland prices across Ohio have risen exponentially over the past few years. So what do you tell farmers when they talk about making advancements and looking to grow that farm in the future?
One thing I love to talk about, and I stress the importance of, is relationship building. That could be with other veteran farmers. Sometimes those veteran farmers are ready to give up a little bit of rented ground. Sometimes they're looking for someone to take over their operation, which could bring up Ohio's newish farmer tax credit law for beginning farmers, which is a great opportunity that we like to talk about too. But also then, your relationship with FSA, with Soil and Water, with the USDA, each of those entities has different grants out there, different opportunities that a young farmer can take advantage of. So building those relationships with your agents that are local to you can be really important for being able to take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, and I think it was too with a lot of maybe young farmers, if especially if they didn't have family in the business before and they're cash running farm ground, making sure that your leases are in writing and making sure that you build relationships with those farmers, and kind of going the extra step to make sure that you're taking care of their ground like you would want somebody to take care of your ground. Building all those relationships and strengthening those communication lines is going to be key for any young farmer to be able to keep growing their business.
That's Ashley Donnelly and Jonathan Cottingham. They're with Wright and Moore. You can find out more about this topic and more on their website, ohiofarmlaw.com. Really appreciate you guys taking time to visit about this very important topic of getting young and beginning farmers started in a very challenging world. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Sometimes out here, you have to speak loudly.
Our voice alone may not have as much impact as we would like, but my voice
and my voice can be heard and influential through membership in Ohio Farm Bureau.
My voice, along with tens of thousands of Ohioans,
makes a difference when it comes to legislation, regulation, or litigation that can be positive or potentially harmful to those of us in the agriculture community.
Become a member today at ohiofarmbureau.org.
Because there is strength and members.
Find out how Nationwide Agribusiness can help you grow your business. Get to know the people with the experience and knowledge to help you. Whether you are looking to protect your farm or ranch from the ground up, or need someone who understands your changing commercial ag needs? Find out how to better manage the risks of your ag business, or how quickly you can get back to business. Learn how you can protect your next with Nationwide on your side.
Much of Ohio going to be treated to a rare phenomenon this spring when a total solar eclipse will be viewable for much of the state. Today, we're talking with Policy Counsel for Ohio Farm Bureau, Leah Curtis, about some of the concerns this might bring up for landowners. And Leah, this is such a unique situation. What are some of the things landowners need to be aware of as they might see more people wanting to come out to their property and to rural Ohio for the best seat in the house?
So from a legal perspective, I think we're seeing a lot of concerns and hearing a lot of concerns about landowner liability. And that's something that we hear questions about really all the time. But as we are concerned about, maybe people are going to try to come on our property to watch the clips. They might try to park on, the side of the road. So from a legal perspective, a landowner's liability to someone for an injury or some sort of harm that might happen is largely based on whether and to what extent the landowner has what we call a duty of care to that person.
A duty of care sounds very legalese, but what does that mean for landowners out there?
So it is, and that is kind of, the court term, but depending on how or why the person has come to your property, that's going to determine what level of care you need to provide for them, what level of, attention you need to provide to prevent a harm. So a landowner has no duty of care for a trespasser. That's kind of the basic bottom level of care. You don't have to have any warnings, and you don't have to change your property in any way for a trespasser. On the contrary, a person that you might invite to your land for a business purpose, so maybe if somebody is coming to your property and you've charged them to come watch the eclipse on your property, you would have a higher duty of care, and you should do things like attempting to remove dangerous situations. You should warn them of any dangers that would be present and take steps to prevent harm or injury to that person. And then, of course, no matter why someone's on your property, whether they are trespassing, whether they're there because you invited them for any reason, you cannot intentionally cause harm to someone on your property. So taking any kind of intentional act to harm someone, that is always going to be a situation where liability could happen.
I know as this date of April 8th gets closer and closer, our phones keep ringing about questions landowners have. If landowners are concerned about the possibility of trespassers, what can they do?
So trespassing is always a big concern, and it can be a little sticky to deal with. So one thing that you can do is try to ensure your property is marked with signs. So I want to be clear, the law does not require you to have a no trespassing sign. That's sort of a myth that people, have out there, that they have to have them. They have to have them every so many feet. There's nothing in the law that says that. But what a no trespassing sign does is it's helpful to put people on notice that they're not welcome on your property. So well-meaning people that may just have unintentionally stumbled upon your property, when they see those signs, they're going to know, I'm not supposed to be here. It also just serves if there is a situation of a lawsuit or a criminal charge, that no trespassing sign can help as evidence that that person should have known they were trespassing. And then things like physical barriers, permanent or maybe even temporary fences. Maybe the eclipse warrants putting up some sort of temporary fence. Making sure buildings are locked can be helpful if they are there or could be added reasonably. And then, I do think it's a good idea to talk to your law enforcement. You can discuss your concerns. You can get their recommendations. If you're concerned about people maybe stopping on the road right away, that's something that law enforcement would need to help you with. So they can help with that. And then just finally, our landowner toolkit does have a section on landowner liability, and it would be a really good thing to review. It covers all those levels of duty of care that you would have to the different types of people that might come to your property, and can give you some good background on landowner liability in general.
Now, there are some landowners that are right in the path of this total solar eclipse that are thinking, I might be able to benefit from this a little bit. Maybe bring some people onto the farm and give them that view and get them into rural Ohio and give them an experience they won't forget. What do landowners need to know as far as having some campers or those guests that are invited on the farm?
So when it comes to camping on property, we do see this from time to time. Landowners might have one person, a hunter or something camping, but when you get to a certain level, campgrounds are regulated entities. You do have to have a license to be a campground. And so generally, most of those licenses start when you have at least 5 or more spots or 5 or more campers. So if you are thinking you will be to that level, you do want to work with your local health department to see, what do I need to come in compliance with? There is a temporary campground license. So if that is something you want to do, I would say, probably start now, getting prepared, making sure you have all the things in place. Um, there are a lot of concerns with sort of sewage and septic and water in particular. So those are things that you would need to be thinking about and paying attention to. And the local health department can help you work you through that.
Mom and Dad had Woodstock. You and I have eclipse stock, I think, on some of these farms across Ohio here in the beginning of April. If campers are on your property, are there liability concerns there?
Yeah, so at that point, if they're paying you, that's that business invited person. That's that highest duty of care. You're going to need to warn them of any dangerous situations, remove dangerous situations as reasonably possible. And then, you also want to think about those practical aspects of having somebody camping on your property, bathrooms, water access, again, sewage, septic, that kind of thing. How are you going to address those needs of those people while they are on the property? Just to save yourself some headaches while that's happening. If they're not paying you, if they're just people maybe you invited, maybe they're friends of yours, that is a slightly lower level of care. You don't have quite the highest level that you do when people are paying you, but you do still need to warn them of dangerous situations. You want to try to take steps to avoid dangerous situations for those people. And again, the landowner toolkit does go over all of those levels of guests. And so it's a good thing to review as you are kind of planning out what you want to do during this eclipse.
A lot of things to think about and prepare for, all for 3 minutes of total darkness during the day on April 8th for Ohio's total solar eclipse. Leah Curtis, Policy Counsel with Ohio Farm Bureau, joining us for this Legal with Leah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.